Hello and welcome to the Friday wrap up brought to you by David Gokhshtein, the Gokhshtein News Network. I'm your host, Landy, and today is February 13th, 2026. We're looking at Bitcoin here on the weekly to start. And where is it? Right around the 200 EMA. We did talk about this earlier this week, and I believe, it was earlier this week. Would have been earlier this week because we needed to see last week's close. So it was earlier this week. Talked a little bit about the downside to $65,000 because that is where the weekly lower second standard deviation of the Bollinger Bands is. We have seen Bitcoin trying to hang on to $68,000 after getting that spike down to that lower second standard deviation of the Bollinger Band set. Now, if it is lost between now and the weekly close, I would look for that lower second to keep heading down. Below 65, there is, some precedence for heading to, that 58, but I don't think it's going to be that aggressive, but 58 to 60 would be back on deck if it hadn't already been hit. Anywhere below the 200 period exponential moving average anyway. You'll have to forgive me for my voice. I am catching a little bit of a cold here. Towards that 200 EMA, SMA rather, below the 200 EMA here in white, there is the purple 200 period simple moving average at 58. This is going to probably come up towards that 60K region, but 58 to 60 is kind of the area to pay attention to there anyway, as that is this weekly higher low. And anywhere below there, we have to entertain trips down to $55,000 to $56,000. So we've got 54.8, essentially 55 to 56 on the closes here. There is also a swing low down there in the low 50s at 52.5, and then of course there's $48,000 to $49,000 down by the 377 EMA. Now, if it gets anywhere below there on continuation, then, we're looking mid 40s and potentially pulling in $38,000. I talked a little bit about this earlier this week. But right now for Bitcoin, it does look as though it wants to kind of hang out in this area. And I'll show you why on the daily. There is a setup that could begin to play out, but it is a weekend. So I think that you need to pay very close attention to the conditions. But there is the potential setup for things to test further upside. And I'll show you what that setup is and what the invalidation is. And that's where, I would entertain a bounce on the weekly. Now, currently, we have the lower first standard deviation right here in gray that is right around $79,500 to $80,000. Now, that does depend on your chart. And this is Coinbase spot. So I would say right around $80,000. Of course, $80,000 is right around that weekly low that the bulls needed to see swung and held or held in a higher low fashion to try and break the downtrend trend reversal setup that had confirmed a couple weeks prior at $98,000. Now, we could see face melting rallies. Understand that we could see a rally all the way to 85 by the 100 period exponential moving average. Doesn't do anything. We could see a rally to 93.5, which of course would be the weekly lows right over here, right? Above 85, you've got 86 here at this weekly. If it gets above 89, it could go to 93 over here by this weekly. Does nothing. And that's right where the 55 period exponential moving average is and the basis band, which is a 20 simple moving average, does nothing. Why? Because it does nothing for structure, right? The conditions are that we would need to see, if this is going to be, we would need to see a low set. This is still a move in progress for the weekly. So until we see a low set, which, if it closes anything like this would happen above, in this case, 71,380, I would still need to see dailies above, 72.2 to 72.5 and really starting to push up towards the end of, next week, if this week's candle closes anything like this. But that would set a low. But until we see a low set, there's nothing really to look for structurally. But if we see a low set, the only way that bulls can kind of, you know, recover from this right now would be to close above $98,000, 97,963, essentially $98,000, which is this weekly low right here. So realistically, this is, even on rallies from here, it is a bearish retest of, you know, low side structures over here, the top side structure of this consolidation, all these highs up here, which it's trying to hold on to this high right now, around that $65,000 to $66,000 between this high and this high, which we talked about prior to the actual move to 65. So just understand that this is probably going to take a little while, unless we see the bull, and it would take a little while even if we saw the bulls recover with a weekly close above $98,000, which would change things, right? That would give the bulls the potential to come down and put in a higher low or equal low in relation to this low. But first we need to see a lower low set. So this low needs to be set. This is not a low yet. This is just a swing low for the prior weekly. Okay. And until then, it's a move in progress. But what is the daily telling us right here? The daily is telling us that we are above the signal line here, and we do have a little bit of upward momentum, but it's weak. It's very, very weak. And I want to caution you against getting too excited, but there is the potential for a daily trend reversal setup, because we now have a higher low as of the Friday closure. Now it's still Friday for me, but for Bitcoin, it is Saturday. So the close open occurs at 7 p.m. Eastern here in the United States, 4 p.m. Pacific right now, or 0 UTC. Now, in this case, we saw the Friday candle close above the 68,382, which is a weekly level, and the lower first standard deviation. We also saw that it got above the bearish open at 68.8, I believe, yes, with a close at 68,812. So this is a higher low. Now, very simple setup. We have a higher low in place. This is exactly what I was talking about, by the way, the other day, to look out for as a potential trend reversal setup. I myself did take a long off of this setup. I have already taken some profits on that long. I'm not very confident. But if I see some opportunity for further upside, I will hang on to it. I have stops in profit right now. So if it does head back down, it will stop me out in profit. What are the conditions? The conditions are hold this low at $65,000 now. And again, this is right on that weekly that we talked about. It's about $60,050 on the weekly. I just call it 65. So it came down and hit that area. And now, in order to confirm this trend reversal setup, which is a higher low, we would need to see closes above 72,232. That would be a trend reversal confirmation, and we're likely looking for some further upside from there. You know, maybe the $75,000 area is possibly in play, right? And that's around the basis band currently on the daily. Anywhere above there, I would look for things to try to head up to test around 78, which is a big weekly, 76 to 78 in here where these daily candles are, both big weekly levels. I'll turn those levels on in just a moment. And then anywhere above there, I'd look for, move to try and test above 78 to 80, which is going to be right around these lows here. So, or this low here, I should say. And we saw a little bit of a front run there at $81,000 on this swing. That would likely line up on any kind of a trend break with where the overhead resistance is starting to come in as well, in addition, to support and resistance levels of interest on weekly time frames and prior daily structure, but also for, the upper first standard deviation, the 55 period exponential moving average, the 50 period, so on and so forth. So that is what I'm watching for on the daily. Let's go ahead and and throw on the current zones. And these are weekly zones. You might remember me making this chart and then describing that how this chart was laid out. But in this case, we see that we have 68 or just above $68,000 here. We've got 69.5 to 69K, prior all-time high to around 69.6, 69.5 region. Above there, we've got 71.3, which we haven't seen a close above. We even see lower term timeframes get above there. It's highly likely that we'll see a move towards that 72.232. Anywhere above there, it's all about 73, 835, which was the all-time high that came in prior to the halving, to 74, and then maybe a move to 75 is on deck, and potentially more to some of the further weeklies overhead that were lost. And in this case, there is gaps, but I'm just marking the weekly closes because Bitcoin's been so darn clean with them. Above 75, there's 76.5 to 78, 78.3 here. Anywhere above there, that's where that 80,000 to 80,500 is coming in. And that is this wick low over here. If we got an even stronger rally than that, you can entertain a move to and maybe even above or a swing above that upper first. I'm not really in the camp of like that being the most likely thing in the mid to low 80s, somewhere around 83.5 to 85 up here by that 50 period simple. But it is something to pay attention to if we do start seeing levels get run through to the upside here. Forgive me, I'm stretching out a little bit. It's been a long day. And I'm a little hungry. I don't know if you heard that. But yeah, don't get your hopes up too much if you see a rally, and here's why. It is a seller's rally typically off of a move like this, and we would need to see the bands go back into compression. All right. So even if it ends up playing out like long term, it ends up, hey, this was the low at 60, yada, yada, yada. Don't get too excited. We're below all major moving averages right now in a very big trending move to the downside. And what we would need to see is the bands are pretty spread out right now. We would need to see compression and then expansion through to reclaim the lows all the way back to try to get to those highs at 98. So I do think that's a pretty low likelihood if we do not see a compression to upside expansion. And even if we were going to see that play out in a bullish manner, we would need to see compression on the bands. Bitcoin getting above all those major moving averages and compressing would be the preferable thing. So like consolidating on the lows here is kind of where you would want to see it. Otherwise, we're probably looking at continuation to lower prices, meaning not just to test the low at 60K, but under, 58 to 60, 55. And that's a wider area I've talked about, 48 to 55, at least taking it level by level. So, that's what did I just delete? Oh yeah, it was the arrow. All right, so that's Bitcoin. It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy to figure out. Now you're going to see a lot of what I talked about earlier this week. You're going to see a lot of like, look, it's in the oversold zone of RSI, and it's so crazy. This is your opportunity. Understand that the oversold zone can stay oversold for quite some time, and it usually will take a little while here from the initial big push down into the oversold zone or the bearish control zone of RSI. That's where we had last cycle, just as an example, that's where we had that big push down, was the initial push down to put that low in at $17,500. It was 17,567.45 here. And, it took a long time for things, we had a nice seller's rally, and then, it tried to hold the lows in this weekly over here, right? Tried to put in a higher low close with a lower low swing. So right here. And then it just turned around, dumped out with some more lower lows, lower high, and then the big move down to put in the final low side structure. And that took until, in this case, till November of that year in 2022, consolidated around. And by the time it shifted structure, right, By the time we had a break of this lower high at $21,500, that didn't come in until, we had the confirmation in January of 23, mid-January of 23 in this case, that was a structural shift, and to start looking out for higher lows, which we got. We got a lower low swing with a higher low close there that scared the ever-loving crap out of a lot of people. But again, at the time I was very bullish. Many were still looking for like 10 and 12K. I was very bullish. I had already hit my target anyway, between $15,000 and $16,000 to the downside. But I wanted to kind of point out that between these, between the initial entry and push down into the bearish control zone or the oversold zone, Bitcoin stayed down here for, let's go ahead and pull the measurement tool up real quick here. It was, I believe, 31 bars. We've only just started that trip down there, with the big push down as of last week. And we haven't even seen a low set, but let's say that this is one of the first big low swings and it sets a low here as a lower low. And this is just ballparking, just to show you similar situations. Could it play out like that again? Typically we don't see we don't see the same exact move. So it was 31 bars, right? And I've shown this already, but could it be around the same amount of time that it takes to get down there? Absolutely. That would put us somewhere in, like what I've been saying, somewhere end of Q3 into Q4 to actually find the actual macro low. And that could be something that we're playing out here. Could it be shorter than that? Absolutely. Could it be longer than that? Absolutely. I think that if it was going to be longer, or on the longer end of things, that it's likely that we see lower prices, maybe even significantly lower prices if it's going to take longer than it did like last cycle. So just pay attention to the daily setup that I just showed you a little while ago. Hold the low at essentially $65,000 for the weekly, but for the daily, you want to see the low held there as well. And then taking out 72,232 for some potential further upside tests. In this case, they would initially be seen as bearish retests of supports that were lost. All right, let's go ahead and check on a few other things, and then we'll wrap it up. Commodities, gold is still in roughly the same area. After failing to get above around 5,100 on a close, we did get a swing above there to 51,119, but failure to get above there is failure to continue. And it's still kind of a range setup, even if it does get above there to around 5,200. Above 5,200, we can entertain 5,400 and maybe more to the highs here. Above 5,400, 5,420 to that 5,600 high. Anywhere below the 4660 area here, we're looking towards 4,500. And if it does break down below there, there's a giant wick down here all the way at 44. Maybe a test of that, but between 45 and 44, kind of where I'd be looking for things to settle down. I wouldn't really be looking for too much of a big, bad downside move until I see a compression on this. This is a very wide consolidation zone for the moment. Same going on with silver. We did get a lower high. We did get a move down to that key level at 74 to 75. And it has held up thus far. So there is actually a condition for a trend change here because this is a bit of a downtrend. We would need to see a higher lower equal low as it relates to this last lower low structure, which beware anywhere below $70 that it could get tested down to that, mid 60s area down to 65, 64. But if we do see a low set on the daily, like next week, early next week above $80, look to 85. So, and that was one of the areas that I talked about to the upside already earlier this week. Oil is consolidating. If we lose, I think I mentioned this as well, we hit 62. If we lose it though, that's the 200 period simple moving average, look for 60 bucks or so on a swing and maybe settling in around the mid 60s. If it does break down aggressively from there, the upper 50s around 58 to 60 in here would be fair game. And I wouldn't be looking for too much more until later. If it lost like 58 and a half or 58 bucks, then I'd be looking for a move, probably a wider move back down to 55 at the support to 56 down here, almost 57. Back to the top side, just watch above above 65. If it can get above there, then the major overhead resistance, a common area across many of the highs that have come in here, is around 66 and a half. And then we can start looking up towards 68 to 70. Natural gas still hanging out on the lows here. It did sweep around the $3 region at 305. And if it drops it, then we're looking probably, 280, 290 initially, and then maybe more to the downside. But I think it's in for consolidation. Watch it above 360. Could it go for 380, 390, maybe even $4 in and around the cluster of bands here and EMAs and MAs? Absolutely. If it were to get above there aggressively, 450 to $5, kind of between this 618 and the upper first would be fair game. But for right now, it's just kind of hanging out on the lows. When looking at traditional markets, Dow, that is a big old high put in here with a bunch of bearish divergences building. So what do you got to pay attention to? Same thing as earlier this week. The 50 simple moving average and 55 down here, right around this low at 48.30. Anywhere below there, we look to around 48.50 to 48.450. If it does lose that area, then we look down to around 48. Pretty easy here in terms of band setup. Anywhere below there, then it's the upper 47s. But realistically, just pay attention to this low next week, and I'll talk about it on Monday at that 48.30. If we do see it trading back above and closing back above, specifically right around this high side structure at around 49,620 to 49,650, look right to 49,925 to 950, and then possibly back up into the 50K region to try for the highs again in the low 50K region around 50,200 to 300 by the upper second, and maybe even go for the highs at 50,500. NASDAQ looks awful. Looks awful. I mentioned that this looks like it could turn into a rollover. It's not destiny for it. It did break down from the low and head right to the area that I talked about. In and around the 24 and a half region. So in fact, we got 24, 5, 14, 96. So right where we were talking about earlier this week and last week, should it break down, right back to the lows. Essentially, if it drops 24, 555, 24, 455, then I would be looking for a move down to 24K even. Go test this low and around the lower third, and we have both the 200 EMA and SMA essentially right there, upper 23, 9 to 24K. If we see a move back above 25,382 or 25,4, I'd need to see closes above there. Then we can entertain trips to, 25,750, maybe more above there to start testing 26K again. We went down and we tagged 680 and under actually. So for SPY here, and with SPY, the next big area is if it does drop around 675 here at the lows, between these two lows here, we're looking, 670 2 to 675 is kind of the key area below there. It's like 672 and a half to 674.30 here. Anywhere below there, we're looking 670 and under to the mid 660s down here in this area. Especially if we start to see 670 to 669 dropped here. probably pretty quickly on expansion, and then maybe even roping in 660 to the upper 650s down here and more. If we do start to see that really rolling over. And that's pretty much what I got for you today. And what to look for over the weekend would be, closes maintaining above this weekly low around 65. That would also preserve for Bitcoin in this case. That would preserve that daily, because this is the weekly low here at 65. It's also the daily higher low swing that is now confirmed as of Friday's closure. So pay attention to that on the weekly. You want to see closes above there. And then next week, what you would want to see is closes above this weekly's high. And the weekly high would be from Sunday, which is just below where the daily needs to trend break. And next week we would be looking at that 71,380, 71,4 region, and then an attempt for a test at 72,232. And that's going to be it for today. I want to thank everybody. Had a lot of great conversations this week with many of you that watch, and I hope that you like and share this out there if you did find it helpful. And then, of course, I hope that you tune in on Monday, because we'll of course be talking about this stuff after the closes on Monday, and kind of see where things ended up. Now, I also want to wish you a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening, no matter where you are in the world. Please trade safe, and of course, as always, stay safe. With all of that being said, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you on Monday. Take care. Landy out.